Why did the Japanese bomb Pearl Harbor? Tensions between Japan and the United States have been rising for more than a decade, when the first Japanese bomber flew over Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, making war seem imminent. On December 7, 1941, Japan launched an attack on the U.S. Pacific Fleet at its base in Pearl Harbor, but why? The Japanese attacked the USA for what reason? The solution is oil. Japan intended to create its own empire and had been modernizing its economy for much of the 20th century. However, with all but 6% of its oil supply imported, Japan lacks the natural resources to make it a reality. After taking Manchuria, Japan was forced to search elsewhere for the materials it needed to battle after being entangled in a full-fledged conflict with China in 1937. The USA was gradually waking up from its isolationism at the same time. America responded against Japan's occupation of French Indochina in 1941 by freezing all of its assets in the country, preventing Japan from acquiring oil. Japan intended to grab the necessary oil by force because it had lost 94% of its oil supply and was not willing to comply with American demands. However, an armed U.S. response would almost probably result from striking south into British Malaya and the Dutch East Indies. Japan chose to strike the U.S. Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor in an effort to minimize that response in the hopes that the U.S. would engage in peace talks. A significant risk was taken with the attack on Pearl Harbor, but it did not pay off. Japan achieved its goals in the Pacific and Southeast Asia, but the United States did not react as anticipated. Japan's fate was determined since the U.S. prepared for complete war rather than returning to isolationism. Tensions began during the Great Depression. Tensions between Japan and the United States had been rising for more than a decade prior to the attack on Pearl Harbor. Japan, an island nation that had spent much of its history cut off from the rest of the world, started a phase of aggressive expansion at the beginning of the 20th century. These ambitions were driven by two victories: the battles against China in 1894-95 and the Russo-Japanese War in 1994-5, as well as by Japan's successful alliance with the Allies in World War I, 1914-18. Japan attempted to force its way into China in an effort to address its economic and demographic problems during the Great Depression of the 1930s, beginning in 1931 with an invasion of Manchuria. Japan withdrew from the League of Nations when a panel it created denounced the invasion. It would control Manchuria until 1945. A fight at Beijing's Marco Polo Bridge in July 1937 kicked off a new Sino-Japanese conflict. Following the Japanese Army's takeover of Nanking, the seat of the Chinese Nationalist Party or Kuomintang, in December of that year, the Nanjing Massacre, which lasted 6 weeks, became well known. The U.S. was trying to stop Japan's global expansion. The United States started enacting economic sanctions against Japan in response to these crimes, including trade embargoes on the export of aircraft, oil, and scrap metal, among other crucial commodities, and provided financial support to the Kuomintang forces. Japan joined the Tripartite Pact in September 1940 with Germany and Italy, two fascist nations at the time at war with the Allies. Months of unsuccessful negotiations between Tokyo and Washington preceded the attack on Pearl Harbor. The United States had thought that imposing embargoes on oil and other vital commodities would force Japan to curtail its expansionism, but the sanctions and other punishments instead forced Japan to stand its ground and inflamed the nation's resentment at prolonged Western meddling in Asian affairs. To maintain its position as a significant global power, Japan believed that war with the United States was unavoidable. The element of surprise was their only opportunity because the odds were stacked against them. Destroying the base at Pearl Harbor would mean Japan controlled the Pacific. The United States had established Pearl Harbor as the primary base for its Pacific Fleet in May 1940. The base at Pearl Harbor was left comparatively undefended, making it an easy target because Americans didn't anticipate the Japanese to attack first in Hawaii, nearly 4,000 miles from the Japanese mainland. As Japanese forces advanced on targets throughout the South Pacific, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto spent months organizing an assault to destroy the Pacific Fleet and to demoralize the U.S. Navy so that it would not be able to respond. The United States entered World War II as a result of Japan's surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, which was followed by the deadly atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945. The Pearl Harbor attack, however, appeared to be a success for Japan at first. Approximately 2,400 Americans were killed at Pearl Harbor when its bombers attacked all 8 American warships, sinking 4 of them and damaging another 4. They also destroyed or damaged more than 300 aircraft. By the beginning of 1942, Japanese forces had taken control of a number of present-day and former Western colonial possessions, including Burma, now Myanmar, British Malaya, Malaysia, and Singapore. the Dutch East Indies, Indonesia, and the Philippines, giving them access to the abundant natural resources, such as oil and rubber, that were found on these islands. However, the attack on Pearl Harbor had fallen short of its goal of fully destroying the Pacific Fleet. Oil tanks, ammunition dumps, and maintenance facilities were all missed by the Japanese bombers, and not a single American aircraft carrier was there at the time of the raid. This failure finally caught up with the Japanese in June 1942, when American forces decisively won the Battle of Midway, shifting the course of the Pacific War. That's it for today's video. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel for future updates.